The first message arrived not by wire, not by radio, but by a feathered courier whose wings beat tirelessly against the morning sky in the early hours of World War I, when the battlefield was a chaotic expanse of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Communication was the lifeline of survival. Soldiers shouted over gunfire, runners dashed through shells, but the deadliest and most reliable messenger often came from the skies, the homing pigeon. Unlike the roaring engines of tanks or the clattering of artillery, these birds were silent, swift, and unimaginably reliable, capable of crossing enemy lines to deliver crucial intelligence. While generals debated strategy and soldiers fought desperately for ground, pigeons like Sher Ami were already soaring above no man's land, carrying tiny capsules of hope that could mean the difference between life and death. Their role was so critical that military units invested enormous time training these birds to navigate through smoke, gunfire, and the chaos of war without faltering. It was a quiet, almost invisible war effort, but one that had immediate and often spectacular consequences. Across the muddy trenches of France, armies relied on messages that could not be intercepted or destroyed by the enemy. The telephone lines were easily cut, runners were shot, and radios were bulky and unreliable. Pigeons, however, operated beyond the reach of human interference. They became the ultimate intelligence agents, carrying reports on troop positions, enemy movements, and urgent requests for reinforcements. Soldiers learned to trust these feathered messengers with their lives, watching as a pigeon was released into the gray dawn and disappeared toward its loft with unerring accuracy. Some pigeons survived shell fire and predator attacks, arriving battered and bloodied, while others never returned, their loss felt as deeply as that of any human courier. The value of these birds was so great that some received medals and formal recognition. Sher Ami, for instance, was awarded the French Croix de Guerre after delivering a message that saved the lives of more than 190 soldiers. It was extraordinary to think that in a world dominated by human conflict, a small bird could carry the weight of an entire operation on its wings. Meanwhile, humans were not the only animals enlisted for war. Dogs, trained for everything from carrying messages to sniffing out mines, became indispensable members of military units. Messenger dogs ran through mud, snow, and barbed wire with capsules strapped to their collars, dodging bullets and artillery fire with instinctive agility. Detection dogs were trained to identify explosives or hidden soldiers, their keen sense of smell turning them into living radar systems. In chaotic battlefields, these animals were faster and more reliable than any machine, able to maneuver through debris, trenches, and ruined villages where humans might falter. Some dogs even took on rescue missions, locating wounded soldiers buried under rubble or snow, guiding medics to their location, and saving countless lives in the process. Their bravery, often overshadowed by human narratives, became legendary in certain units, with soldiers forming deep bonds with these canine partners who seemed to understand the peril around them better than anyone else. Not all animals were small or nimble. Horses, long a staple of war, continued to play an enormous role in both world wars. In regions where vehicles could not traverse, cavalry and transport horses pulled artillery, carried ammunition, and even evacuated the wounded from the front lines. In the mud-choked trenches of Europe, horses became the backbone of supply chains, moving heavy loads that no man or machine could easily carry. Camels were deployed in desert campaigns, carrying supplies across vast stretches of inhospitable terrain, while elephants in the jungles of Burma and India were used to haul logs, clear paths, and construct bridges, proving that intelligence and strength could take many forms beyond the battlefield. Even pigeons or dogs were complemented by these larger animals, whose presence allowed armies to maintain mobility and logistics in regions where technology alone would have failed. The training of these animals was meticulous and often remarkable. Pigeons learned to navigate hundreds of miles back to their home lofts, enduring gunfire, smoke, and storms. Dogs underwent rigorous conditioning to resist fear, respond to commands without hesitation, and function in the most chaotic environments. Elephants and camels were conditioned to human commands, trained to carry heavy loads, remain calm under fire, and navigate difficult terrain. Soldiers formed unique relationships with these animals, often relying on them in ways that machines could never replicate. In letters sent home, soldiers frequently mentioned these companions with affection and respect, recognizing that their survival often depended on the loyalty and skill of creatures who had no understanding of politics, ideology, or strategy, only instinct, training, and courage. The scale of animal involvement in war is staggering when viewed in context. Millions of horses were deployed across Europe and Asia, thousands of pigeons carried messages that shaped the outcomes of entire battles, dogs were embedded in almost every unit for communication, detection, and rescue, and even larger or exotic animals were put to work in specific regions to overcome environmental challenges. In many cases, the success of a campaign relied not on technology or human numbers alone but on the seamless integration of these animals into complex military operations. Their silent contributions, often invisible in the historical record, highlight a fascinating intersection of nature, strategy, and survival. Yet, the stories of these animals were not only about utility, they were about bravery and adaptation. G.I. Joe, a pigeon in World War II, delivered critical intelligence in Italy that prevented the bombing of Allied troops, earning medals and acclaim. Smokey, a small Yorkshire Terrier, ran cables through narrow tunnels under enemy fire, becoming one of the most famous rescue and communication dogs of the Pacific Theater. Even the elephants and camels face the dangers of their environment, showing resilience under conditions that would have crippled untrained humans. Across continents, wars became laboratories for observing the extraordinary capabilities of animals, pushing them to limits few would have imagined and proving that in desperate times, survival depended on unexpected forms of courage. From the skies above the trenches to the jungles of Burma, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen plains of Eastern Europe, animals played roles that shaped the outcomes of battles, campaigns, and wars. They were couriers, scouts, carriers, and companions, silent heroes whose stories often remain overshadowed by human narratives. Yet without them, messages would have been lost, soldiers would have perished, and entire operations could have failed. They remind us that war is not just a contest of men and machines, but also a testament to the remarkable, sometimes underappreciated abilities of the natural world. By the end of the first phase of the wars, as humans tallied their victories and losses, the contributions of animals became impossible to ignore. Pigeons continued to soar across battlefields, dogs patrolled trenches and saved lives, and horses, camels, and elephants carried loads that technology could not manage. Their presence shaped strategy, influenced decisions, and in countless ways, preserved life. The legacy of these trained animals would continue into the next phase of global conflict, proving that even in an age dominated by machines and modern warfare, the loyalty, intelligence, and courage of animals could tip the scales in the most critical moments of history. Spy pigeons and trained animals. The morning fog hung low over the French countryside, muffling the distant sounds of artillery and footsteps, but above it all, tiny wings beat furiously against the chill air. This was no ordinary dawn. Allied commanders had learned to rely on the silent couriers whose speed and accuracy often eclipsed the most advanced technology of the time. Pigeons, trained with unwavering precision, were being released from covered posts deep behind enemy lines, carrying messages that contained intelligence about troop movements, ammunition shortages, and enemy positions. In many cases, these birds had the uncanny ability to navigate landscapes obliterated by war, flying over trenches, shell craters, and burning villages without hesitation. For the soldiers who had seen friends fall to gunfire or disease, these small creatures represented more than communication. They were hope, persistence, and a lifeline to survival. The complexity of wartime messaging went far beyond mere delivery. Each pigeon carried messages written on thin paper rolled into tiny tubes, attached to its leg or tucked into a small harness. Commanders had to encode information meticulously, knowing that if a pigeon fell into enemy hands, the contents could be deciphered. In response, special coding methods were developed to ensure that only the intended recipients could read the messages. Some pigeons completed hundreds of missions, flying dozens of kilometers each day, sometimes facing predators, storms, and gunfire, yet consistently returning to their lofts. Others perished mid-flight, casualties of a war that spared neither man nor beast. Despite the risks, these winged messengers became essential to military strategy, proving time and again that ingenuity combined with natural instinct could accomplish feats machines could not. Beyond pigeons, dogs became the unsung heroes of the battlefield. They were trained to detect mines buried under mud and debris, to locate wounded soldiers in areas too dangerous for human medics, and to carry messages through zones of enemy fire. Some dogs became specialists in identifying poison gas leaks, using their sensitive noses to alert units before invisible threats could strike. Units across Europe and Asia recognized the value of these animals, training them with precision that mirrored human soldiers. The bond formed between handler and dog was profound, built on trust and mutual reliance. In many cases, dogs acted independently, making split-second decisions that saved lives. One such dog, later celebrated in military accounts, detected a hidden cache of explosives that could have destroyed an entire platoon. This incident underscored the intelligence, courage, and adaptability that made animals indispensable allies in warfare. Horses continued to play an extraordinary role despite the mechanization of modern armies. While tanks and trucks could transport artillery or supplies under controlled conditions, the unpredictable terrain of battlefields, mud, rubble, and steep inclines often required the strength and sure-footedness of equine companions. Cavalry units still performed reconnaissance, patrols, and rapid assaults, while transport horses delivered essential equipment to positions unreachable by vehicles. Cavalry tactics evolved to integrate with modern weaponry, blending speed and mobility with strategic positioning. Moreover, in emergency situations, horses carried wounded soldiers to safety, navigating through shell fire and debris with remarkable reliability. In essence, they served as both engines and guardians of survival, their presence bridging the gap between traditional combat and mechanized warfare. In desert campaigns, camels were equally critical. Their ability to endure long distances without water made them perfect for logistics across North Africa, where supply lines were thin and the environment unforgiving. Armies learned to rely on camels for transporting heavy loads, scouting for water sources, and moving units discreetly through terrain that would exhaust humans and vehicles alike. Camels' adaptability to harsh climates, combined with their natural endurance, made them essential in sustaining campaigns that otherwise might have faltered under the harsh desert sun. Similarly, in the jungles of Southeast Asia, elephants became the backbone of construction and transportation operations. They cleared paths through dense foliage, carried artillery and timber, and assisted engineers in building bridges and supply lines where machinery could not operate. These massive animals were calm under pressure, strong beyond measure, and surprisingly intelligent in following complex instructions, qualities that turned them into living machines of war. Meanwhile, the intelligence community explored more unusual applications of animals. Hawks and eagles were sometimes trained to intercept enemy pigeons, effectively turning the sky into a contested space of invisible warfare. Their presence introduced an aerial dimension beyond human control, adding both risk and opportunity for armies reliant on avian couriers. Rats were tested for detecting mines and explosives in confined or dangerous areas, leveraging their keen sense of smell and small size to navigate spaces inaccessible to humans. In certain naval experiments, dolphins and sea lions were trained to detect underwater mines and retrieve equipment, foreshadowing a post-war expansion of animal-assisted military operations. These initiatives, experimental at the time, demonstrated a willingness among military leaders to innovate using biology as much as engineering. Training these animals demanded ingenuity and patience. Pigeons were conditioned with familiar lofts and incremental distances, gradually increasing the challenges of their missions. Dogs underwent simulated battlefield exercises, learning to respond to commands amidst noise, chaos, and smoke. Larger animals, like elephants and camels, were acclimated to heavy loads, unfamiliar terrains, and the presence of weapons and explosives, ensuring they remained calm and cooperative under stress. Handlers learned to interpret subtle cues from their animals, creating partnerships that functioned as finely tuned operational units. The combination of training, trust, and natural ability produced results that often outperformed mechanical alternatives, revealing a dimension of warfare where instinct and intelligence converged with human strategy. The use of animals also reshaped the psychological dynamics of war. Soldiers found reassurance in their presence, a tangible sign that life persisted even in the midst of destruction. Observing a pigeon successfully navigate a battlefield, a dog detect a mine, or a horse carry supplies through danger offered a moment of hope and order amidst chaos. Stories of heroism, bravery, and survival involving these animals were circulated in newspapers, letters, and official military records, becoming symbols of endurance and resilience. Over time, their contributions were formally recognized, with medals, citations, and commemorations honoring their role in preserving lives and supporting operations across continents. As campaigns progressed, the cumulative impact of these animals became undeniable. Every message delivered, every mine detected, every supply transported, and every life saved contributed to the broader strategic objectives of the Allied forces. Animals proved versatile, resilient, and indispensable, filling gaps where human and mechanical capabilities fell short. Their integration into war planning reflected a recognition that successful military operations depended not only on firepower or technology but on resourcefulness, adaptability, and an understanding of the natural world's potential. By the close of this phase of the conflict, the legacy of these trained animals was firmly established. Pigeons had completed countless critical missions, dogs had saved thousands of lives, horses and camels had ensured mobility in extreme conditions, and elephants had enabled engineering feats previously unimaginable. Their service revealed a fascinating truth: in war, intelligence and courage can manifest in many forms, and the natural instincts of animals, when honed by training and guided by humans, could rival or even surpass the capabilities of machines. These stories, often overshadowed by accounts of human heroism, remain a testament to the profound interconnection between humans and the animals who stood beside them in the most harrowing moments of history. The first light of dawn revealed a landscape scarred by conflict, yet alive with a hidden network of creatures whose roles were as vital as any soldier's. Soldiers moving through trenches barely noticed the pigeons perched nearby, waiting for the signal to launch into the sky. They were unaware that in the coming hours, these birds would carry encrypted messages across enemy lines, traversing kilometers of territory riddled with artillery fire and patrols. In parallel, Specially trained dogs crouched in shadows, their keen senses alert to the faintest disturbances. Every movement, every sniff, every subtle behavioral cue was a part of a living system designed to anticipate danger, deliver information, and save lives. In many ways, the war was not just a contest between armies, it was a delicate orchestration in which humans and animals moved in tandem, their fates intertwined. As the war expanded, new innovations in animal training emerged to meet unprecedented challenges. Pigeons were not merely released blindly, they were subjected to obstacle courses designed to simulate battlefield hazards. Smoke, loud explosions, and predator models were introduced gradually, conditioning the birds to maintain course even under extreme stress. Dogs underwent sophisticated drills, learning to differentiate between enemy and friendly scents, to detect concealed weapons, and even to respond to subtle hand signals in complete darkness. In naval contexts, animals like dolphins and sea lions were conditioned to locate submerged mines or retrieve equipment from treacherous underwater environments. The precision with which these animals were trained reflected a new era of biological engineering, where natural instincts were enhanced and directed for the strategic advantage of armies. In the theaters of North Africa, camels became indispensable assets for logistics and reconnaissance. Their endurance allowed troops to traverse vast deserts where vehicles would overheat or become trapped in sand. Soldiers learned to rely on their memory of water sources and their ability to remain steady under exhausting conditions. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, elephants enabled engineers to clear jungle paths and transport heavy artillery, turning previously impassable regions into operational zones. Their intelligence and calm demeanor made them reliable in situations that would have overwhelmed human or mechanical counterparts. Even in the cold European winters, horses adapted to icy terrain carried critical supplies to forward positions, ensuring that troops could maintain their positions without interruption. The strategic deployment of these animals often turned the tide of battles. During reconnaissance missions, pigeons delivered photographic intelligence, allowing commanders to adjust tactics before an ambush could unfold. Dogs detected hidden explosives or enemy positions, preventing casualties and enabling safer troop movements. One documented instance involved a small squadron of messenger dogs navigating a bombed village to deliver urgent orders after communication lines were severed. Their success averted a disastrous retreat and preserved the cohesion of the unit. In every case, the animals acted with a level of reliability that machines, vulnerable to technical failure, could not match. Their contributions were subtle, often invisible to the average soldier, yet crucial in the orchestration of wartime strategy. The psychological impact of animals on human soldiers cannot be overstated. Units often reported that seeing a bird return safely with a message or a dog successfully complete a search gave them a sense of hope amidst chaos. Pigeons arriving with news could reverse panic into decisive action. Dogs, whose loyalty and courage were unquestionable, provided companionship and stability, reducing stress and reinforcing morale. In harsh environments, elephants and camels served as both transport and a form of reassurance. Their presence signaled that progress was possible even under extreme conditions. The bond between humans and animals in combat zones became an unspoken lifeline, where trust and cooperation extended beyond conventional tactical considerations. Technological limitations further amplified the importance of animals. Radar was primitive, radios could be jammed or destroyed, and vehicles were prone to mechanical failure in mud, snow, or sand. In contrast, pigeons navigated using instinct honed through rigorous training, dogs detected threats invisible to human eyes, and larger animals traversed terrain that no machine could conquer. These natural advantages allowed armies to maintain communication, transport, and reconnaissance in conditions that would otherwise have paralyzed operations. In essence, animals became living extensions of human strategy, filling critical gaps and ensuring operational continuity. Across multiple fronts, the stories of individual animals inspired entire units. G.I. Joe, a pigeon credited with saving a battalion from friendly fire in Italy, became a symbol of precision and courage. Smokey, the Yorkshire Terrier, performed feats of engineering and communication that would have required entire teams of soldiers to replicate. Elephants in Burma worked alongside engineers under enemy fire, demonstrating a calm intelligence that allowed complex logistical operations to succeed. Each account, whether in official records or whispered among troops, highlighted the extraordinary capacities of these creatures and the human ingenuity that had trained them to harness their abilities for wartime purposes. As the war dragged on, the lessons learned from employing animals evolved into institutional knowledge. Armies refined training techniques, developed specialized units, and recognized the strategic value of integrating animals into broader operational planning. They learned to respect not only the physical capabilities of these creatures but also their instincts, adaptability, and resilience. In many respects, the success of military campaigns hinged as much on these natural allies as on tanks, planes, or rifles. Without them, communications would have faltered, reconnaissance would have been delayed, and countless lives might have been lost. By the end of this stage of the conflict, the use of trained animals had matured into a sophisticated component of modern warfare. Pigeons, dogs, horses, camels, elephants, and even marine animals demonstrated that intelligence, bravery, and reliability were not exclusive to humans. These silent participants in war, operating without recognition or fanfare, influenced outcomes and saved lives in ways that were often unrecorded but deeply consequential. The legacy of their service persisted long after the battles ended, a testament to the remarkable intersection of natural ability and human ingenuity in the theater of war. The battlefield had fallen silent, but the echoes of service were far from over as soldiers returned to bases and cities began the slow process of recovery. The contributions of animals in war started to emerge not merely as footnotes but as defining elements of strategy and survival. Pigeons that had once darted between trenches were now housed in lofts, their wings still sharp, their instincts still honed, awaiting missions that might never come. The lessons learned from these feathered couriers reshaped the way armies approached communication. Military strategists began documenting successful flight patterns, survival rates, and mission-critical behaviors, understanding that the natural navigation of these birds could not be replicated by early machines or radios, which were often unreliable or intercepted by enemies. In effect, the pigeons had not just delivered messages, they had demonstrated the untapped potential of integrating living agents into complex wartime logistics. Meanwhile, dogs continued to serve as indispensable partners, not only on the battlefield but in post-conflict operations. Mines and unexploded ordnance littered regions long after the guns fell silent, and trained canines were deployed to detect and mark these hidden threats, saving countless civilian lives. Rescue operations in bombed cities relied on their extraordinary sense of smell and agility. Dogs that had once carried messages between trenches were now guiding medics through collapsed buildings, locating survivors, and warning of hazards too subtle for human senses. Their presence underscored a fundamental principle learned during the war: animals were not merely tools, but collaborators whose instincts, loyalty, and courage could extend human capabilities in ways previously unimagined. Horses and other transport animals, once central to mobility in battle, also transitioned to critical post-war roles. In devastated urban and rural regions, where roads had been destroyed and vehicles were scarce, horses, mules, and camels facilitated the movement of supplies, reconstruction materials, and essential personnel. In some remote or mountainous areas, the reliability of these animals remained unmatched. They could traverse terrain where vehicles would fail, ensuring continuity in rebuilding efforts. Soldiers who had developed deep bonds with these animals during combat continued to work alongside them, recognizing that their endurance, intelligence, and resilience had been indispensable in war and remained vital in peace. The intelligence agencies and military planners, reflecting on wartime experiences, realized that animals also had a symbolic and psychological value that machines could not replicate. Public awareness of the contributions of pigeons and dogs grew through newspaper articles, medals, and exhibitions, creating narratives that blended heroism, loyalty, and scientific ingenuity. In towns and cities across Europe, people celebrated the animals' achievements, understanding that these creatures had not only executed missions but had also embodied hope and resilience in an era of unprecedented destruction. The recognition extended beyond individual animals. It influenced training programs, military doctrine, and even civilian applications of animal intelligence in fields such as rescue, detection, and logistics. Post-war, the innovations developed for wartime animal training began to influence broader scientific research. Studies in animal navigation, scent detection, and behavioral conditioning expanded rapidly, driven by practical lessons learned on the battlefield. Pigeons inspired experiments in long-distance navigation and communication protocols. Dogs influenced early research in scent-based detection systems. The military's collaboration with elephants, camels, and other larger animals informed studies on biomechanics, load-bearing, and cooperative problem-solving. In this way, the legacy of wartime animals extended into peacetime advancements, bridging natural ability with human innovation and leaving an enduring imprint on science and technology. Even unconventional experiments gained attention. Dolphins and sea lions, initially explored for mine detection and underwater reconnaissance, continued to be studied in naval research programs, establishing foundations for future animal-assisted maritime operations. Hawks trained to intercept enemy pigeons inspired biological approaches to air defense and aerial interception techniques. The strategic insights gained from these programs demonstrated that integrating natural intelligence with human planning could achieve outcomes far beyond the scope of purely mechanical systems. It was a remarkable paradigm shift, where living beings were understood as operational assets capable of both initiative and execution. Moreover, the war had demonstrated the extraordinary adaptability of animals. Pigeons flew under unprecedented pressure, dogs worked in environments of extreme noise and debris, elephants navigated dense jungles under fire, and camels endured the harshest deserts. These experiences highlighted the resilience of living creatures and their capacity to learn, perform, and survive in complex, dynamic situations. Militaries began to codify these lessons, creating manuals and training regimens that would continue to inform operations in conflicts long after World War II. Animals were no longer ancillary, they were integral to the conception and execution of missions that demanded both intelligence and instinct. The human-animal relationship forged during the war also had a lasting cultural impact. Stories of heroism and sacrifice circulated in memoirs, films, and documentaries, shaping public understanding of the conflict. Monuments, statues, and medals commemorated individual animals and their remarkable contributions. Soldiers and handlers often continued to care for their animal partners, integrating them into civilian life or ensuring their well-being post-service. This enduring bond underscored a profound lesson: courage, loyalty, and intelligence are not limited to humans, and acknowledging the contributions of animals fosters a broader, more inclusive understanding of heroism. By the end of this chapter of history, it became clear that animals had left an indelible mark on modern warfare. They had proven that strategic thinking could extend beyond human ingenuity, that instinct could complement planning, and that courage could take many forms. From the tiny pigeon carrying messages across hostile skies to the massive elephant enabling engineers to reconstruct critical infrastructure, each animal had contributed in ways both tangible and symbolic. Their service reshaped military doctrine, influenced scientific research, and left a legacy of recognition and respect that continues to this day. The silent wings, the keen noses, the steadfast hooves all had played a role in shaping outcomes that human eyes alone could not have achieved. As nations reflected on the past, the lessons of these animals informed not only military thinking but also approaches to risk, innovation, and resilience. They reminded humanity that survival often depended on collaboration across species, on respecting natural intelligence, and on harnessing capabilities beyond what was visible. The war had ended, but the story of these animals endured, leaving a testament to courage, partnership, and the extraordinary potential found in the living world.